Okay, so this is a brief video I'm recording, providing some additional details that we will need as we're moving forward with our case study and the development of a business impact analysis and security plan. All right. So, as a starting point, in order to do this stuff, when we're creating a business impact analysis, the first thing we need to understand is what is the systems and applications and supporting technology that we're working with. Right? What is the landscape? All right. And ordinarily, what we would do is, as we would go into an exercise like this, we would go through and do an analysis. All right. To kind of accelerate that, since we're, for the purposes of this class, I've gone back and I've created a landscape that we would work with. All right. And so we've put this together, so we're going to use this as our starting point. Right? So this analysis assumes we have two types of just technology, or two things we need to look at. One is going to be two categories. One is going to be applications, and the other one's going to be technology. So the applications are really grouped into these are the applications, the computer applications that we're working with. Right? And for our case, since we're a school, there's really three types of applications that we're concerned about. One is the business applications. Another category is academic applications. And the third is what we call collaboration types of applications. All right. And for our the technology side, we're really looking at the network infrastructure, network technologies that are in place, as well as the servers, all right, as well as servers and those systems. Okay, so that's what kind of the high level. All right, so let's look at the applications. Right, so so the scenario we have is we're looking at we're running a school. All right. So there's a couple core applications. So if you go look at, if you go to the administrative offices and you kind of see what people are running, there's a couple core applications that we're working with. All right. So the first one is going to be your accounting applications. All right. Basically, what is your, what's our general ledger? What's our, of our balances, cash flow, things of that nature. So you have accounting application. And then we have an accounts receivable application, which is, sometimes that's tied into the accounting application. Sometimes that is a separate. So we'll assume that there's accounts receivable. In this case, we'll say we're just going to make the assumptions as a separate accounts receivable application that works with the accounting application. And then we have an application for accounts payable and for purchasing. All right, so purchasing is, we go out and we have to buy things for the school. Anything we would buy from the school, we would run it through a purchase. There's an application specifically designed to do purchasing, and as part of that is also, basically it's a procure, and we procure products, and then we pay for the products. So the accounts payable is wired in, is built into that. So the idea is we buy stuff and then we have to pay for it. That's what that function is. And then we have an HR application for human resources. We hire people, we fire people, we pay people. So that's all part and parcel of this HR application. And finally, we have an application that kind of tracks facilities and maintenance. So it tracks our, what assets we have, kind of the state of spare parts, or things of that nature. So there's these are the core business applications we're going to assume we're dealing with, in our scenario here. And then, because we're a school, there's also a kind of a set of applications that are specifically focused on academic. Right? Not every schools have these things, but other companies, manufacturing companies, don't have this stuff. But that's just because we're a school. We have a category of applications that are tied to specifically focused on academic and academic support. So the first one we have is academic support, and we'll use our example of this one is Moodle. All right, so we use Moodle all the classes are executed through Moodle, and everybody gets their classes and will have access to the content through that. So that's an application support, academic support type of application. We also have a registration application, all right, which is our what classes we have, what's the roster, who's registered for what class, all right, who are the instructors for the classes, things of that nature. We have a billing application, so when people sign up for classes, we send them a bill, which you'll note is also kind of a separate. It's not the same thing as sometimes these things are tied to accounts receivable. In our case, we're going to say the registration and billing are tied together. So once again, these are all assumptions. All right. So we'll say there's a billing application that's tied to the registration application. And then finally, we have a system that handles the academic records for students. How many students we've been in, what classes they've taken, what was their what were their grades, what degrees were awarded. So all of that stuff, and this is a longer term. So this goes back, this will have, this can go back years and years and years. All right. So this is the second set of applications we support. All right. The third set of applications we support is, we call kind of a collaboration. All right. So it's how people, how people communicate back and forth within the organization. So email, in our case, we're going to assume fairly simple, email, and then basically desktop office automation. In this case, we're going to assume we're using Microsoft Office 365. So we Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, and you can assume that email is kind of tied in with that. All right, so these are the business applications. So when we talk about, and each one of these has a particular value in the organization. All right, so obviously, and not everything is the same. Will be different values. So like you had a disruption, if you lost all your facilities, the question would be, what do we need to bring up? Obviously, ultimately, you want to bring all these applications need to be restored. The question is, though, which ones do we bring up first, second, third, and then, in addition, we also need to know what sort of time frame these things need to be brought up in. We can't bring them all up. We're not going to bring them all back up simultaneously, but there needs to be some sort of expected window that we could restore these systems, within. So, okay, if we have a major disruption, we would have our applications back up within 24 hours or 48 hours, depending upon what the needs are. So part of what we'll be doing with this business impact analysis is kind of thinking in terms of, put yourself in the position of somebody in the school and say, okay, given what we do at the school, and given these applications, which ones should need to be brought up first? Which are the really important ones? And in what sequence would they need to be brought up in? All right. So this is the application side of things. So let's look at some of the technology stuff. There's a bunch of technology that we are using in the school. All right. So number one, we have an internet access where we're connected. Everybody in the school has access to the internet. Right. And in addition, what we also have is our access to the internet is protected. So we have direct access to the internet, but we also have a firewall, which is basically provides a protection, so for us to be able to communicate out, but not to let everybody back into our internal networks or intranet. All right, and what we've created is what they call a DMZ, a demilitarized zone, which is really a space between firewalls where what we can do is we can put servers that need to be accessed from the internet. But we don't have, so they can be accessed from the internet, but still be protected. So we can still protect everything on the back end, the back end of our environments. All right. We also, the assumption we're having with this, the firewalls we're using right now, and this DMZ is built using advanced firewalls. So we have it has a built-in intrusion detection system. All right. So that's built. So that's built into our environment. All right. In addition, we also have a router. So, what we need to do is we need to be able to communicate. TCP/IP requires that we have a router in place to be able to run our operations. So, we have a router in place. In addition, across the campus, we have, a distributed network, a local network that's really spread across all the different buildings in the school. All right. And tying all these things together is a set of high-speed switches. So like every building will have a switch in it. All right. And what will happen is all of the wiring, all the communication, all the connections and whatnot will tie into the switches, and all the servers will tie into the switches. So basically you've got what we call, it's a high-speed switched network that ties it ties the campus together. And what we have is we have a bunch of these. In our case, there would be, maybe, or the assumption we would make is one in every building. And then we would use that, and that's how all the systems will communicate with each other. In addition, finally, we also have wireless access points. So not only do we support, wired communications, but we also have a wireless access point. All right, so we have a couple of these spread about the campus to provide wireless access, and then the wireless access points plug into the switches. So really, what the wireless stuff is really just at the last connection from your device to the switch, which then goes into which then runs into the rest of the network. All right. So we have these different. So this is kind of the technical infrastructure that's in place, right, from a networking perspective. In addition, we have a bunch of servers, all right, and these servers will have different functions. All right, so we have an email server, all right, which handles the email for the school. So when people send email, we can get email from different locations. So there's a server that's set up that does that. In addition, we have a couple servers that are out there that specifically will run databases. So we call them those are database servers. And what will happen is the database server is actually, these applications can have a database at the back end. All right, so there's a database behind the accounting application, or a database behind accounts receivable, or the Moodle application. If you look at there's a database, so that's going to be the database server, and that database will be running on these servers. So it'll be a couple servers. All right. In addition, we have web servers. All right. So if you look at the school, we have right now we have the way we get to stuff, the way we access applications is through web servers. Right? So we have a number of web servers that can be tied into databases as well. So kind of that's another, kind of what we call the presentation layers is handled through the web server. Basically, that's can be one server. Our assumption is there's probably a couple web servers in here. And then there's also, in a lot of cases, in particular with these, some of the business applications, what we call an application server, right, which is a layer basically where you do processing. So it kind of sits between the web server and the database server, kind of as a middle tier. So applications, so things like Moodle, all right, the Moodle application will have a front-end web presentation, so that's a web server. It'll have a back-end database server where we store data at, and then it'll have a middle tier, what we call the application server layer. All right, so we'll have a bunch of servers in this, okay, and then we'll also have a domain controller. So for our Active Directory, so this is for our login. When you log in, your security, getting authentication, authorization to get to resources on the network is done through, our assumption is going to be we're using Active Directory for that. So there's at least one domain controller that's out there that runs that does our security. In addition, we have another server function that's out there, remote access server. So if you're connecting in remotely, um, you know, this provides access, gives us the ability to connect in through the firewalls and to be able to, access applications securely from outside, from on the internet. So when we get to Moodle, there's a couple different ways that gets this done. So we're going to assume that we have both servers that are being run through the DMZ, in addition to servers that are also being accessed through remote access. That's, once again, a planning assumption. And finally, we have a backup server. All right, so all of these systems, your database servers, your email servers, your web servers, all of these things need to be backed up on a regular basis. This is part and parcel of your disaster recovery protocol. How we do this, the frequency which we do it with, really drives kind of what the endpoint of what it would take to put it all back together. All right. So for right now, for planning purposes right now, for the work we're doing right now, assume we just have these are the servers we're working with, all right, of different types. Pictorially, it would look something like this. All right, so this is kind of a conceptual diagram here. But what we have is obviously the internet is out here. We have our DMZ, so sometimes we'll have different servers that need access to the internet will sit in this DMZ, which is separate from the internal network, right, and be able to communicate in a protected fashion. We'll have two firewalls, so the space between the firewalls is what we call the DMZ. So we have a DMZ, and as you see, we'll have a number of high-speed switches, dealing with different, in different distributed wherever we need concentration points. So like different buildings, like we would make an assumption that we would have a switch in every building. All right. Also have a couple of wireless access points. Because what happens with wireless access, there's limitations to the range on a wireless access point. So it's so what happens is you usually will have a couple of them distributed in an organization to throughout an operation to be able to get full coverage of it. All right. So with wireless access points, we have a router. All right. Once again, this is what we need to communicate, to everything on the internet, and vice versa. So the internet, so the router will be a communication that's, data will come in, be processed, and routing traffic. And then we have our different server types. So we'll have an email server, database servers, web servers, backup servers, remote access, application servers, and domain controllers. All right. So this is kind of a high level, our starting point. So as we're trying to do our analysis together, kind of our starting point. Right? So how do we use this stuff? All right. So we can, once we have this kind of information gathered, we can begin to start developing the BIA and the planning models. So the purpose of the BIA is to identify the most important applications and associated infrastructure in terms of impact. And based upon this analysis, we can determine what systems and infrastructure needs to be restored, in what sequence, and the times required. All right. So what I want to do for right now, just as we're introducing this and kind of putting this out there, we want to go back and look at, and we'll focus right now on the applications. All right. So think about this. Our scenario is we're in a school and we're supposed to put a recommendation together where the request has been from the Board of Trustees. We put together a recommendation and a plan to, what is our, what's our impact analysis? What's our, what do we have, and what's our, what we would do if we had to do a recovery. All right. So look at these applications. What I want to do for starters, look at these applications. We have a kind of a list of applications, and then think about what would make the most sense. What's the most important ones do you think that we would need to put together, that we would need to have operational for a school if we were to lose them? Which would be the most important to the least important? You can kind of take this and force rank it. All right. Once we get that, then what we can do is then we can go back and match that up once we know what the applications are. Then we can go back and line those applications up against what's the technology. All right, so if we have, say, the accounting application, all right, assumption is the accounting application requires a database server, an application server, and a web server. All right. That would be the first. So, assuming if we had to bring that one up first, I'm not saying we would, but I'm saying as an assumption. All right. As we look at our technical infrastructure, all right, we would say, okay, so obviously we need, we'll need a database server, we'll need the web server, we need an application servers to make it work. If we need security on it, we would need, to have the domain controller up and operational, perhaps, from an authentication perspective. We would need, the switches. We would need a switches to have that operational. Does it need access to the internet or not? If it needed access to the internet, we would have to, kind of see what we would have in terms of the restoration of internet access, DMZ. So what will happen is as we kind of build this list together, we take a first cut at it, and then once we kind of identify it, then we'll go back and then kind of figure out what gets done, what we need to assemble, to put in place in order to be able to affect our recovery. All right. So from our starting point here, think about what's the most important applications and develop a listing of what order you think they should be restored. Just put that together, and then what we'll do is we'll continue to kind of work our way through on this and kind of do more detail. Because what will happen is you create this first list, and then the idea is going to be then we do an analysis. We want to do some sort of impact analysis. What are the bases? We can put the stuff together in order, but part of it is also going to be what are the drivers? What are the things that make it? What are the things that make one application more important than another to an organization? All right. So these are the things to think about as we're starting to move ahead with this. All right. So take a look. I'm putting this out. I've put the deck out onto the site, so I'm also putting the recording out there, and we'll continue to work this thing through. Okay.